Welcome back to another Farming Simulator 25 video and another video in our Can You Make Money series. And today we're looking at sheep and goats. I've done them together because much like buffalo, goats are a type of sheep, and actually everything is pretty much the same for goats except for the fact that they put out milk instead of wool. So the test is very similar to the cow videos if you've seen those. Set up a simple test farm. I've used a giant base game pasture, but what I've done is edited it so that it has automatic watering, so I didn't have to keep bringing water, and it means that also we get the same data as for the cow, so we get the cost of the water rather than the amount used. I edited the capacity as well, easy for me to see, so that I could put in 750 litres of hay. It actually instantly converted it to be grass because they eat grass and hay the same, and then we had grazing as an option as well. I'll talk about that in a bit. And then I've tracked the inputs and outputs and the value of the animal as before. So let's have a quick look at the farm. I've done it differently this time, so I've brought the video into PowerPoint. So here we can see the pasture set up. So it just has meadow as normal, pretty big pasture. It had room for 79 lambs. I brought them at 0 months old, and then have run through, and you'll notice there that there was no meadow had been taken, even though there is meadow grown in the pasture. And as I said, I'll talk about that in a bit. In fact, we can talk about it now. So I've got a few more lines on the feeding graph this time. We'll do the easy one first, the water. So the goats and the sheep use the same amount of water because they're essentially the same animal, and it peaks at 5 months old, and they use £2, dollars, or euros worth of water every day, or sorry, every month per animal. Grazing. So for most of the first, for many months, that is 9 months, grazing was providing all of the food for the animals, even through the winter. So that is the orange line that you can't really see because it's hidden under the grey total line. And then you can see it drops off to 0 and it stays at 0. So I was tracking separately whether grazing food was being consumed or whether the food that I put in the trough was being consumed. So you've got an orange line and a blue line here. And you can see the orange line drops to 0 at 11 months, which was from grazing, and stays there. And so although the pasture regrew, the animals never took food from it again. I tried saving and reloading the game. I think this is a bug currently. I'm hoping the Giants fix it. What I did is in the first 12-month period, I worked out the percentage of time that grazing covered the animal's food, and I've used that for my calculations. That might be pessimistic, but it's at least not optimistic, I think. And I had the pen completely full with animals. It might be that it's a little bit optimistic because it took them a while to get to eating their full amount, but it gives us a basis to go forwards in terms of working out what percentage of the time you're going to have to give them food and therefore assume that you're paying for their food. I've assumed 70% in all of my calculations going forwards. Now it's grass or hay, so it's relatively cheap, although there is an argument to say that you could assume that you might have to be, that anything that you feed sheep, you could be selling as silage, which is worth twice as much. So I haven't done that calculation, but you could make that argument. Anyway, so in terms of wool or milk, so sheep produce wool, goats produce milk. That peaks at 18 months for both. The wool production peaks at 60 litres a month. The goat milk production peaks at 25 litres per month, and then stays flat for as long as I ran the test, which was 36 months. I had to run it for 36 months because that's when the animal value peaked. Yep. In terms of animal value, it peaks at £1,000, dollars or euros per animal. That's the same for goats and sheep, and it stays at 1,000. I did keep going for a bit longer, and it flattens out. I just don't have that in the graph, so it's not like cows, but or particularly beef cows, where it starts to dip beyond the peak. It does stay consistent. So if you keep your sheep for longer, because they turned into sheep at that point. I don't know when they turned from being lambs to sheep. They're definitely sheep at that point, but you're not losing value if you keep them for longer than 36 months. In terms of when you are going to be getting lambs, I'll maybe talk about that on some of the other graphs as well. You get your first lambs from the sheep at 12 months. You get your first kids from the goats at 20 months. They take a bit longer to mature, but they then both produce every 5 months. So I'll talk about whether you want to do that in a little while. On to profitability now. And the first thing to say is, I was talking earlier about the fact that I think grazing will cover their feeding 70% of the time. So what I've done is only accounted for paying for 30% for food for 30% of the time. And what I've done is taken that as the value of hay for 30% of their food. Now, I did say maybe we should be considering that should be silage, because anything that you make into hay, you could make into grass silage. But I've done it as hay because you're making bales of hay, and there's an extra step to make silage and extra time and that kind of thing. So that's what I've done. We've got 4 lines on here. We've got a line each for sheep and goats, where we have brought the animal, and then a line where it's using a farm raised animal. Now, I'm going to talk in a little while about, and I keep foreshadowing it, about whether you should do that or not. But what these lines are the essentially the profit on the animal if you sold it, plus minus the cost of its food, and then plus the value of its outputs. So, like if you sold it right at the start, you'd lose money because you have to pay for the animal, then it's instantly worth less. And then let's say if you sold a lamb or a sheep at that point at 30 months, you'd be looking at making about £3,000 profit from having sold the wool, selling the animal, and what you'd paid to feed it. With the dotted line, you'd make a bit more profit because you wouldn't have paid to buy the animal at the start. Goats are a little bit more profitable because the goat milk is more profitable than wool, it seems. But what it's saying is basically, once you get past, if you're buying the animal in, once you get past about 4 months, you're into making profit because you're producing output straight away. And with lambs that you've raised from the start, you're always making profit. But actually, we can talk about it now. You're making from, actually, we'll talk about it in a bit because I've got a graph that explains it better. But just make a note of the fact that you have, as I said earlier, once you're producing lambs or kids, you have them every 5 months. So you'd be looking to sell them at 4 months old, so you've got space for the next batch. And at that point, you've made, in both cases, probably, less than £500. We're down here, down the bottom here, and so we've made maybe 400, something like that. So remember that number. I think it's less than that, actually. It's way less than that from what I remember. I'll check the numbers before we get to that point. So on the next graph, what we've got is if you're buying the food in. So if for that period where grazing isn't going to cover it, you're buying hay bales in rather than making hay. And obviously you can see you're making a little bit less money, but because grazing covers so much of the year, it actually doesn't have a very big impact. You don't need to buy that many bales of hay to keep the animals fed. So really you could do that. You could dedicate all of your grassland to be the pasture and then just buy some bales when you need to, assuming Giants fix grazing and it keeps working, because at the moment it only covers you for the first little bit and then it breaks. And yeah, but let's assume they do the bug fix and then this works. That's my assumption for all of this. So, but these first two graphs, I'm still assuming that you sell your sheep. The next thing we're going to look at is just the pure profit from the output. So this is the cost of the food and the water, and then selling the goat's milk or the wool without using a production, just going to a sell point, and just keeping the animal. So you can see that actually we're making really good money, really good regular money once the animals are mature. And that's important because that factors into whether you should fill your pen up with mature animals or whether you should have lambs. We can talk about that now. So just to summarize all of that now, the short answer, yes, you can make money from sheep and goats. And so far, all of the animals that we've looked at, the first 4, 5, Giants have set them up to be profitable. With mature sheep, you're looking at making a profit of about 125 per month per mature animal versus just selling the hay. And with goats, you're looking at about £135 per month. So should you have kids / lambs? Probably not is the answer. So I'm going to use the example of a lamb, and let's think, you have to think that you can either fill your shed or your pasture to complete capacity, so you don't have room to have lambs and have it full of mature animals, or you can leave space. And I'm going to use the example that you have it half full as I go through this. So let's assume you've got it half full. You've got space for all of your animals to have one lamb or kid, and then you have to sell it before they have the next one. So because the cycle is 5 months, you have to sell the lamb at 4 months to have space for the next one, is my assumption. At that point, the lamb or goat is worth about £200, less the cost of feed and water, plus any wool that you get from it, because they produce wool instantly, or goat's milk. So what you're actually looking at is about £220 of profit from that young animal. The alternative to that is you could have a mature sheep or goat in there instead, which is making you £125 or £135 per month. So you're losing, do the maths quickly, 500, a minimum of £500 per 4 month block from the income from a mature animal to make £220. So in my mind, you should have the pen full producing wool or goat's milk rather than be producing baby animals. And that will only get better if you use a production. So that's as it stands now, very close to release. That might change as the Giants update the game, but that's my opinion, that you should fill the pen with animals. Once they're mature, they're going to be making you a lot more money per month in what they produce if you sell it at the best price, than having it with space for having offspring and selling those. If you found this video useful, click the like button. Any comments, questions, or suggestions, stick them below. If there are numbers that you haven't seen in here, I haven't calculated them. Someone was asking about return on investment. That's really hard for me to work out because I don't know what pasture you're going to buy, what equipment you're going to buy to produce the different things and that kind of thing. What I can tell you is per month how much an animal is going to make, and then you're going to need to buy land and all that kind of thing. So it's really hard to work out a return on investment. The sheep cost £200. So the pasture cost quite a lot because the fences were really expensive. The base pasture is £14,000. I remember one run of fence along the side of that field was 11 grand. So anyway, click the like button if you enjoyed the video. I'm planning to do more of these. I'm going to do all of the animals except bees. Once I've done them all, I'll wrap it all up into which is the most profitable. Yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling, so I'll see you next time.